So coming up in a couple of days' time is going to be Contender Series week number 2 for the 2025 season, and last week we had a pretty bad card, but I would say an average day for my predictions. I did go 3-2. I started 0-2, just like Jack Della Maddalena did, by the way, and I did start to panic a bit. And then we got 3 in a row after that, and I thought, you know what, that's not too bad. Now, a 3-2 card, it's a lot better than a 2-3 card, I will be honest, but we're really trying to get those 5-0 sweeps this year. I think last year I got quite a few. I think a couple of years ago even I had quite a few as well. So we're going to be trying to go for sweeps every single time. Of course, I think week number 2 could be a good week to do it because we do have some matchups that, in my opinion, are somewhat set up to see some guys shine in their specific moments. And I do think that we are going to see a lot of finishes. And more importantly, I think that this week, especially after week number 1, is going to be kind of one of those cards, which is going to be like week number 2 was after the Joe Pyfer season in 2022, where we see a great card, and we see a lot of contracts handed out. I think especially given the belt order with Jiminez versus Cuozzi to start us off, we're going to get some bangers. Now, of course, I did write articles for this and the PFL, which admittedly was pretty bad for me, unfortunately, on the We Want Picks channel. Angelo had a massive weekend at UFC 319, so if you did want to check out We Want Picks and you did want to get a 10% discount on your first membership, read my article, see what's going on over there with Angelo, Bitsam, and Jacob. You can use the code ARTEM for 10% off your first ever membership. With that being said, we'll get into week number 2. And now we get into the first fight of week number 2, and I do believe that the UFC has made this the first fight of the card on purpose, because this is nearly guaranteed to be an absolute banger. We have 2 undefeated guys, of course, with perfect 8-0 and 10-0 records, and both very high action fighters. The fights that I saw of both of these guys were very entertaining. I do just think that on a couple of the matchups for Tommy Cuozzi, I wasn't really able to get too much out of him because he is fighting not the best levels of competition, but he is absolutely dominating these guys and finishing them very quickly. For the most part, what he does is he will come forward and just very aggressively box in the pocket and then shoot takedowns, get takedowns, and win more often than not by ground and pound relatively quickly. I will say the best performance of his career does come across over a pretty good opponent in Theo Ralang, who actually was on the Contender Series in his own right a couple of years ago in 2021 when he did lose to UFC fighter Steven Nguyen. Now, of course, I would say aside from that, there wasn't really too much to unpack for him. He does come forward very aggressively, he does shoot takedowns, and he does finish his fights very quickly. He does win most of them by ground and pound, as I did say, and even against Giovanni Meza, as soon as he got the takedown, he was on the back and he was ground and pounding him out very quickly. Ramiro Jiminez is a bit of the opposite to me, because I would say that Ramiro Jiminez, I would almost say, is a slow starter. Now, don't get me wrong, he does have a very good share of first round finishes in his own right, but if you do watch his fight, it is relatively fair to say that he can get caught out quite a bit early on, especially his matchup against Pablo Burgos. I do think that this was a bit of an eye-opener for me to kind of see that he can fight back from adversity. Pablo Burgos knocked him down, I want to say 2, maybe 3 times in the first round of this matchup, and of course Jimenez himself actually did get a knockdown in the first round of that fight as well. It was just a fantastic watch that you can see on YouTube. Aside from that, of course, he is getting these great first round finishes, not really over the best opponents, but I will say against Tommy Garcia. Tommy Garcia started this fight by absolutely sprinting into Ramiro Jiminez, trying to get a takedown, and he spent, I would say, most of the fight that didn't last very long defending the takedown and then turning it into a Kimura as they were falling down to the mat. He did get a knockout win over Nicholas Barner, but in this matchup he was taken down in one moment, but he was able to get his way back up to the feet. It is an interesting one to me because I do think that of the fight, Tommy Cuozzi is going to find his own moments. I just do worry a little bit out about the level of competition that Tommy Cuozzi has been fighting throughout his career, with the exception of Theo Ralang and Giovanni Meza. But if he can start fast and shoot takedowns early against Jimenez and maybe get them, I think that I could see him finding success early on. But if Jimenez does survive the first round or have pretty good moments in his own in the first round, I think that we're going to see Jimenez start to take over the matchup and maybe drag Cuozzi into deep waters, because we've never seen Cuozzi in the second round, aside from the one time against Taylor Lang in a fight that he was dominating. So despite me seeing Jiminez actually have to fight through a lot of adversity throughout his career, I do like seeing that because it does kind of make me believe in Jiminez as a prospect just a little bit more because of that. I've seen Jiminez have to go through the fire to then come out on top with a victory, and not to mention, of course, I won't discredit the fact that he does have very good finishing ability. I would say that on the ground, I think that he's a little bit like untested in ways, despite getting that Kimura in his last fight. I would much kind of prefer to see Jiminez control this matchup on the feet. But I do think that Jiminez wins this fight, and Jiminez is actually a relatively big favorite in this matchup. He is minus 350 on Bet Online and Betway at the time that I do record this video. But I will say, if Tommy Cuozzi is going to win this fight, it's probably going to be very early on into the matchup. But I'm going to pick Jiminez to win this fight by finish, most likely in the second or the third round. But Jiminez does have a very good share of first round finishes as well, so I could potentially see these guys just throwing down, and maybe Jiminez catches him with a submission or a knockout in the first round as well. So the pick is Jiminez to win by finish. And now we have Josh Hokit versus Guilherme Uriel, and I actually do like this matchup quite a lot because I think it's going to be fun heavyweights. Now, usually when the heavyweights do fight on the Contender Series, it can result in a very fun fight, but sometimes it can result in a not so fun fight. But I think that Guilherme Uriel, just the way that this guy fights, it is impossible for him to have a boring performance. He just comes forward and he just throws down. I don't really know how else to describe his style because his fights are just absolute brawls. Now, he does have some pretty quick victories, but against Lucas Camacho, these guys were just chasing each other, quite literally chasing each other in the octagon and just throwing overhands and hooks and just really letting their hands go. It was actually quite insane, to be honest, to watch those guys just throw down. And despite him having a lot of these first round finishes, especially by knockout, I don't really know if I would just say that Guilherme Uriel has out of this world knockout power at heavyweight, because despite these quick finishes coming, a lot of them actually are kind of from a accumulation from damage. Even the win over Thiago Silva, which he got in less than 90 seconds, that wasn't just a one-punch knockdown KO. That was like a accumulation of combinations up against Silva. And even Camacho was eating a lot of shots from Uriel and not going down, and was able to fight back, of course, and win the fight. So I would say that Uriel, I think he does probably present, in my opinion, a bit more of a danger factor on the feet than Josh Hokit does. But I think the better, more technical striker is Josh Hokit. Now, I personally don't think that that's really going to matter, because I do think that Josh Hokit does have a pretty clear way to win this matchup, and that is in the grappling. I am aware that Uriel does have his own fair share of defensive submission wins. He's got a heel hook, he's got a guillotine, but if you do watch Josh Hokit's fights, he is finding most of the success with the wrestling and the grappling. In fact, I would say probably all of the success with the wrestling and the grappling. He's a Bellator guy, a guy that they brought in because he was a former NFL player, so I think they had intentions of building him as a prospect, but then the PFL took over and most likely probably released him from his contract, if I was to guess, and since then he's been fighting for the LFA and been looking quite good doing it. The thing about Hokit is we don't see all too much striking out of him. Like, I would say that he is the more technical striker from what I've seen, because he looks comfortable on the feet and he does use his range relatively well. He does fight mostly behind straight punches, but as I did say, he wants to get the fight down to the ground, and once he does, he finds a lot of success doing it. Now, this is the Contender Series. Sometimes a lot of these guys that I think are going to wrestle go out there and not wrestle. But I do think Hokit, if he does get Uriel down, he has showed so much dominance in the grappling from top position in the past. He's got an armbar victory. He's got a crucifix finish recently as well. I think we would see Hokit go out there, take down Uriel, and just find a finish with the ground and pound or submission early on into the matchup, if that is the game plan, which he is going to follow. So I'm picking Hokit. I'm picking Hokit by finish, and he is another very big favorite on this card. He's minus 500 over Guilherme Uriel. Now, I would say, like, if you wanted to bet on Uriel as a massive underdog, I probably would just kind of take the chance on the round 1 KO, because he is just a psychopath. He just comes forward and bombs away. But as I did say, I think Hokit's going to shoot a takedown and find a finish from there. And now Lewis Lee Scott does take on Kaushik Saikumar. And I just think it's too much too soon for Kaushik Saikumar. You know, like he's 5-0 in his career, and Lewis Lee Scott has gone around and he's done it all. He's beaten some top UFC level competition already in his career at only 9-0, and his best win is over Damate Pena. And this was a great win. This was over 5 rounds, a fight which Damate Pena was attempting a lot of takedowns on Lewis Lee Scott, and Scott showed elite takedown defense in this fight against Damate Pena, who actually at one point in his career, you could argue, was probably working his way towards a very big lucrative deal with maybe the Bellator or the UFC at some point, but he did kind of fail the testing, you know, that they do, you know what I'm trying to get to. But yes, and then he had to take 5 years off, but still a very good win, still a pretty good regional fighter, a very good regional fighter, I would say. And Lewis Lee Scott showed over 5 rounds that he could outbox Damate Pena, defended most of the takedowns, I would say, towards the end, like in the 4th round especially. Damate Pena was finding those takedowns on Lee Scott, but that was the 4th round. This is a 3-round fight. And Kaushik Saikumar is a wrestler. I just don't think he's going to get the takedowns on Scott if Scott has shown good takedown defense against other opponents as well in the past. I think Scott's boxing is going to be way too much in this fight. Saikumar, I did watch his most recent fights, obviously, and his striking terrifies me in this fight against Scott. Now, Adamu Isa is actually a prospect that I was following for a bit. He's a bit of an older prospect, but I was looking out for him. But dude, this guy striking, I just don't like Saikumar striking at all. He stands genuinely straight up, and his hands are like this. They're not like closed up like a boxing guard. They're not kind of like the half and half, or you know, like, or even by his waist like some MMA fighters do. He literally has his hands like this when he's standing there, and he's kind of got this awkward Muay Thai style. I wouldn't even say that he is a striker. He definitely does want to get takedowns, but as I did say before, I don't think he gets the takedowns on Lewis Lee Scott, and I think as long as the fight is on the feet, Scott is the much more competent striker. If Scott does just mostly decide to fight behind his hands and not really throw kicks that Saikumar could potentially take him down with, I think that Lewis Lee Scott is going to go out there and get a knockout in this matchup. And Scott, in general, 25 years old, 9-0, very good boxer. If he can pass this test of Saikumar, I think that we could see Scott have a pretty fun sort of UFC career. Not to overlook Saikumar too much, but as I said, the striking just really isn't very good, and I just don't think he's going to get takedowns on Scott. Now, I will say this, though, to give Saikumar some credit, he probably is one of the largest bantamweights I've ever seen. He is 5'10", and he does fill out that frame very, very well, but I think it's too much too soon, man. Like, he's 5-0. Coming onto Dana White's Contender Series. I think if you gave him another year and another few fights, I think it could be a different story. But I think Scott, 9-0, more experience, being younger as well. I think we're going to see Scott go out there and get a knockout as a minus 450 favorite. A big favorite. But now we can move on to the first underdog pick of the card for me. Ignore me not being able to open up this matchup. Brandon Holmes is the favorite over Cam Rowston, and I am going to be picking the Battle Giraffe to win this matchup. Now, Cam Rowston was actually originally meant to fight someone along the lines of John Kunneman, and I was actually going to pick Cam Rowston to beat John Kunneman, because John Kunneman, I just wasn't all too impressed with what I saw out of him. And then I watched Brandon Holmes, and I think that this is a more difficult fight for Rowston, for sure, but I do just think that Brandon Holmes has shown some holes in his game that Cam Rowston could potentially exploit. Now, of course, maybe there is a little bit of bias there because he does fight out of CKB, and he isn't fighting out of Sydney, Tapology. CKB is in Auckland, New Zealand. But anyways, let's talk about Brandon Holmes first. Brandon Holmes is a boxer, I would say, for the most part, and what he does is he does throw a lot of 1-2s, and he's got very good power for the weight class. His most recent fight, and in my opinion, probably the most important fight to watch when you do tape this matchup specifically, was against Zach Borrego. And if you remember Zach Borrego, he actually did fight against Bo Nickel in 2022 on the Contender Series, so he's still going. But in this matchup against Borrego, Holmes knocks down Borrego a lot in the first round, but then Borrego knocks down Holmes in the second round and even hurts him at the end of the first round as well. So it is a bit of a war. It is like somewhat low volume, but there are knockdowns galore from both guys in this matchup. But I think from what I saw that did concern me a lot was just the fact that Holmes is very hittable from range, and also I think that Holmes did kind of display a little bit of lack of a grappling offensive ability, in my opinion, as well against Borrego, because he would knock Borrego down, and then, of course, kind of with the knockdown and Borrego's getting up, he would then attempt the takedowns and try and get ground and pound off, maybe even trying to get a rear naked choke, and Borrego had absolutely no problems whatsoever getting up and out of those positions. And I didn't really love seeing that, because I think that Cam Rowston, despite being a CKB guy, could potentially exploit that hole in the grappling. And I think the hole in the striking for Brandon Holmes is he does not move his head, and he doesn't move his head at all. Borrego did drop him in the second round, I think only once, but it was a pretty bad knockdown in the second round, and he did stun him in the first round. But mostly, I would say, to Holmes' credit, he was really beating up on Borrego. As for Rowston, I do have to be honest, I do have my concerns about the level of competition when it does come to Rowston. Not really like Holmes has beat the best guys in the world, but he's only 5-0 into his career. Rowston has fought 14 times, of course, and the majority of these victories aren't coming over the best fighters in the world. You know, like he did lose to Torres Finney in a fight which he did get out-wrestled, but he did find some of his own success in that fight as well, of course. On the feet in moments, because Torres Finney was bleeding out the mouth at the end of the matchup. But after that, you know, we did just kind of see him go out there and fight for Samurai Fight League, which is a pretty new, awesome, actually, promotion in New Zealand. And then he fought for Eternal a couple of times. We didn't really fight the best guys in Eternal at 185 pounds. But I am actually happy to see him come back, because I do think that he can offer quite a bit to this division. You look at him and he stands side by side with Navajo Sterling. I think Navajo Sterling's listed at 6'4". Cam Rowston and him stood side by side in a photo and looked relatively the same height. He's a big guy for 185 pounds, and he has a long reach. On the feet, he's got that Navajo Sterling sort of, I would say, somewhat safe striking style that a lot of the CKB guys have, which he is going to fight from range. He is going to throw a lot of kicks, a lot of push kicks. He's not really going to quote Bet Sam, put himself out of position to land a strike. That is a Bet Sam saying that he has quoted to me many, many times breaking down this matchup. So Rowston, he's not going to put himself in the firing line to risk getting a KO win, but on the feet he is going to be safe, and he is going to throw out a lot of volume there. I actually would be very interested to see what would happen if Rowston was to offensively wrestle against Holmes, because as I did say, it does seem like that is potentially a big gap in Holmes' skill set. But I think that for Rowston here, he's taking on a boxer, a guy that doesn't really throw all that many kicks, and I think that Rowston can kind of pick him apart from range, and maybe even try to exploit the grappling as well. So I'm picking Rowston here as the underdog right now. Rowston is plus 125 on Bet Online, he's plus 130 on Betway, and he's plus 124 on FanDuel. So maybe if you give it time, maybe the line will flip on this one here, but I think that Rowston is a pretty good underdog pick, in my opinion. And now we can move up to the main event. We got Manuel Exposito versus Jose Delano. And despite me picking Jose Delano with relatively high levels of confidence, I don't think that Delano should be a minus 450 favorite. I think that I could line this fight a bit closer than that. But the reason why Delano, I think, is a much bigger favorite than I expected, and also is my pick, by the way, I am picking Delano. It's not close on the feet between these guys. It just isn't. Exposito and Delano are levels apart between each other in the striking. Delano is a very technical Muay Thai kickboxer. His most recent performance against Abu Muslim Alikhanov was incredibly impressive, in my opinion. And then his win over Alan Villalba was very good as well. And he got another knockout victory here against Yair Jusino, which also impressed me a lot. And I did just glaze over his loss to Gabriel Santos. But Gabriel Santos, this was part of a tournament which Santos ended up winning and then went on to fight in the UFC. And he's had mixed success, I think it would be fair to say, but that's not a bad loss to have against Santos at all. Delano, I think against Exposito, he needs to defend the takedown, because Exposito, I don't like his striking. I don't really like it at all, to be honest, because he just kind of bombs forward and he's just throwing hooks to close the distance and then attempt the takedown from there. If Delano can avoid those closing hooks that he throws and defend the takedown, this is Delano's fight to lose for sure, because I think that he's the much better striker out of the two, much more technical, There is just some concern, though, regarding Delano, because Delano has been a guy, in my opinion, that's been knocking on the UFC's door for a very, very long time, and just in moments when it kind of really mattered, he just couldn't quite get the big performance that he was kind of needing. But I think that against Exposito, he's got a guy that leaves his chin up in the air a bit. He's a bit sloppy on the feet, in my opinion. He's very, very good at pressure, though. I will give him that credit, but he needs to get the takedown against Delano to then find his success from there. He is coming off like one early finish, and then aside from that, he was going the distance against guys that I personally just don't think are as good as Delano. And if you look at Lazaro Dayron, a guy that fights for the PFL now, what is Lazaro Dayron known for? His wrestling, and more specifically his takedown defense. And if you can see Delano go out there, and if he can defend all of the takedowns from Exposito, he should look like a big favorite. He should be able to find the knockout, and I'm picking Delano by KO in the main event. Let me know what you think of those predictions, and I will see you guys in the next one for Contender Series week number 3.